path to improving yourself as an Android developer is paved with many different options and habits that you can form. Which path should I take? How can I shape my habits in order to improve myself? Today, I'm going to be speaking about the path you can take to improve yourself as an Android developer. My name is Rebecca Franks, and I'm an Android developer at Over. When I was told that this talk would be the keynote, I honestly thought that there was some kind of mistake. Maybe I read my emails wrong, or maybe the email was sent to the wrong person. You see, if you had to ask anyone that knew me 5 years ago if Rebecca would be the type to be standing on a big stage in front of a few hundred developers speaking, they would have probably said, no, she's not the type to do that. And I probably would have agreed with that too. And yet here I am, on a big stage in Italy, and I'm going to be speaking about a few things that have been in the back of my mind for a while. You see, I'm from South Africa, a country where developers typically think that we're not good enough unless we're anywhere but from South Africa or Africa. And it's unfortunately ingrained into our culture. We're brought up to look up to people that aren't like us. They don't look like us, they don't speak like us, and they just generally aren't from where we are from. And when I travel outside of South Africa, I'm surprised at how deeply different these cultures are between the different communities. And no, I'm not talking about how amazing the transportation systems are or the advanced passport control mechanisms. I'm talking about the culture and the outlook of developers. So in South Africa, we are brought up to think that we aren't capable of competing on the global stage with other developers. And basically, if you want a showcase for imposter syndrome, South Africa is where you will find it. South Africa is a place where people don't believe in themselves. And today, I'm actually in disbelief that someone believes in me enough to let me stand here for 40 minutes and talk to you about my experiences as a developer. And being at all these different events, being part of Droidcon Italy, has taught me that anyone can contribute to these kind of events, no matter your level of experience or where you're from. So today I'm going to be speaking about a few of the different things that I believe you should do as a developer in order to improve yourself. I started my development career about 5 years ago, and there have been many developers that I've worked with and different people that I've seen and learned from. And I've also been a part of very different teams where I've come across many different types of developers. And I've worked across a range of very successful teams and some teams that haven't been so successful. And all of this has kind of shaped my habits and formed the characteristics that I find when I look out for other developers. I've also been fortunate to be a part of a hiring process before where I've made decisions upon approving candidates to come and work with me or work with the teams that I work with. So my software development journey is in no way complete, and there's still so much that I can learn and so many more habits I'm aiming to develop. I'm in no way an expert myself. I have still a lot to learn in my career. So I've been asked this question a couple of times in the past, and that is, how can I improve myself as a developer? And now, if you ask someone what you can do to do this, or how can I become a better developer, you may hear very differing opinions. So some may say, you aren't a good developer if you don't know how to do MVVM in your app, or it's essential that you know how to write Kotlin in order to become a unicorn developer. And sure, these statements may be true. Learning Kotlin will make you a better developer, of course, but it's not essential to know everything in order to be a great developer. What really matters is your work ethic and outlook on life. Now you might be thinking to yourselves, well, I just bought this conference ticket just to hear Rebecca say that learning the latest technology is not important? What? Don't panic. It is important. But my job today is to leave you thinking about the bigger picture of it all. So not just thinking about the latest technology, but also thinking about the people part of it too. So I believe it's important to leave a good impression wherever you go. And to have someone say when you leave a job, it was great to work with you. I like to leave a good impression and to have as much of an impact on my role as what I can. So today, I want to talk about a few different things that I believe every developer should keep in mind when dealing with different people and trying to improve themselves. So looking into a few different parts of your job, there are 4 different circles that I want to focus on today. There are habits that you can do to improve you, yourself, your company, and finally, the community around you. When you're just starting out as a developer in any role, in any company, you may be primarily focused on yourself, which is relevant. You have to grow and learn and grow for yourself. But as you start to kind of get a little bit further in your career, you might start to think about the people around you. How can I make a difference to my team? How can I help these developers that are around me? And then you might even go into thinking a little bit bigger than that and thinking of looking at the company or product that you work on and say, how can I, as a developer, improve this company or this process that I'm working with? And then some developers even go on even further to start to say, okay, I'm helping out in a lot of different areas, but what can I do to improve the community around me? And that's when you start to look at all these different things that we can do. And no matter your level of experience, if you're starting out, if you're still a student, or maybe you are now been working for a couple of years, there are many different things and different parts you can do in order to improve yourself. So let's take a look at the things you can do as a developer to improve yourself. And these are obviously the easy ones because they're all within your control. And most developers get this part done pretty well and right quite easily. I mean, obviously, there's always things you can do to improve yourself. And a lot of people have asked me this question. So, Rebecca, what do you do to stay relevant? Or how do you ignore all the drama that's going on around you or all the new different technologies that are coming out? And there's a lot of different things you can do. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the fact that you should keep learning. So I'm probably talking to the wrong set of developers when I say this, but you should always aim to keep learning, no matter how much you already know. So this was a bit of a misconception for me when I started out at university. When I first finished university, I thought, great, I know everything, I've got my job now, I don't need to learn anymore. Boy, was I wrong. When I arrived at my job, I was like, I do not know anything, I need to keep learning. And I haven't stopped. So since I started working, you have to keep learning. And I've met a couple of software engineers who are so stuck in their ways that aren't willing to change or learn new things. And this can be really damaging for your career. So not only are you confining yourself to what you already know, but at some point, you're left behind if you don't keep up to date with the industry. So there are plenty of different ways in which you can keep up to date and keep your learning in check. My favorite for Android development is to read Android Weekly. And this is just a weekly newsletter that comes into my inbox with the best content from the week of Android topics. So I scan this list, find things that I want to read, and then read them. It's a great way to keep up to date. The other way I'd like to do it is to follow the Android developers blog online. So this is where I find all the latest news and technology insights into what is happening on Android itself. And then my personal favorite is following a whole bunch of Google developer experts or people that tweet a lot about Google and Android on Twitter. And this is how I keep up to date with what everyone in the community is reading or learning about. So I like to also practice what I call reflection on how much I've learned. And there's no better way to know how far you've come than to be able to look back at what you've learned. So there's a couple of ways I like to do this. The first way is I keep a Today I Learned list in Trello. And that's basically just a list of little tidbits or things that I've learned recently. And this often can turn into a blog post or a tweet that I might write out later. But it's basically just for myself to look back on to see how much I've learned within maybe the past month or year. And I know I've made a lot of progress if I look back at everything and there's a lot in that list. So what I also like to do is I have a private or personal Discord channel. And this is just me on my own channel speaking to myself. And basically here is where I keep a whole bunch of links and content to things that I found are important. And I can categorize them by Android or iOS or anything else. And this for me is a nice searchable way to find things that I've learned. This could be anything for you, though. It could be something like looking at using Pocket or maybe a personal Slack channel. But I like to keep track of what I've learned as well. So let's talk a little bit about prioritizing your learning. How can you go about learning when there's just so many different things coming in and so many different topics for you to learn, especially just within Android itself. So this is a hard decision process to make, and I don't think I've figured it out quite yet. I've definitely spent time learning things that was probably not important at all, and I feel like the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the better you realize what to leave out and what not to focus on. So people have asked me this question: how do I go about prioritizing my learning, especially in the sort of Android field? And the first thing that I look at is how well it's supported by Google. So the technology or library that's been released, maybe, is this something that has been made by the Google or Android team? If it is, then I'm pretty sure I have to dive into it, because there will be a lot of companies that are using these technologies or making use of this in their apps. So something like this for me was Kotlin, for example. I didn't really take to Kotlin at first. I was like, okay, people are talking about it, but whatever, I'll leave it. I don't know, I just won't use it. And then Google I/O announced official support for Kotlin. And then I realized, okay, now's the time I need to learn this language and I need to know how to do it. And now to this day, I'm writing Kotlin full time. So there we go. The next thing that I consider is how much of a reach of the topic or the library is of choice. So if it's something to do with that'll be widely reached by a few different apps, so maybe architecture-wise or networking, something that a lot of apps use, then I'm going to probably need to dive into it and understand what people are doing. But if it's something like Chromecast or Android TV, it's very sort of niche in Android itself, and I'll probably only need that when I'm actually making something of that kind of app. So that's something that I would sort of deprioritize in terms of prioritizing something more important like architecture. So another thing that I consider is how many people are talking about the library or topic. So if it's a lot of people keep talking about something, so for instance, there was a lot of talk on RxJava and Dagger. So if people start talking about this, I kind of move this topic further up in my priority list. And the last thing that I think about is the tech or libraries that I'm personally interested in. So some people might call this a specialization. I don't know if I like that so much, but basically it's something that I'm really interested in. And this falls under the lines of for me, constraint layout, I'm really excited by on Android. So I really like looking at anything that comes out in that industry or that library. So if anything comes out, I'm going to be sure to read up about it. And that's just personal preference for myself. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about writing. So I've been writing blog posts for a couple of years now, and I found so much value in trying to explain a concept in a blog post. And I often find myself, when I need to write a blog post, I need to go and Google a little bit more about this topic in order to write a really, really good blog post, or really understand or cement my knowledge in terms of understanding how something works. So I find writing has increased my level of understanding of a topic because I can now write about it. And I'm going to be sure not to be wrong, because nobody wants to be wrong on the internet. So writing for me has also improved my grammar and sentence structure quite a lot by using tools such as Grammarly, or asking my peers just to review my content before I post it. But a lot of the time, writing doesn't have to be in the form of blog posts. So there is great value in writing good documentation. I don't know about anyone else, but for me, I've never looked at a GitHub repository with a README and thought, damn, I wish people didn't write this README. I've never thought that about anything. So it's always good to write documentation or contribute by writing in some way. But at the same time, I want to say, don't panic. So you shouldn't panic if you don't know the latest technology. For instance, I only taught myself Dagger a couple of months ago. And guess what? I wasn't a worse developer for not knowing how to use Dagger for a few months. I believe it's very important to acknowledge the things that you don't know, and accepting that proudly and wearing it with pride. It's a great characteristic of a mature developer to be able to admit something you don't know. So the know-it-all developer is not a nice person to work with, believe me. Be honest in your skill set, and if someone had to ask me today, Rebecca, do you know how to use TensorFlow? I'd say, well, I've looked at a few code labs and I know what it is, but I'd have to go and research more about this topic. It's way more respectful than being like, yes, I know how to do TensorFlow, and then my boss or team expecting me to now be able to write this code. So it's a lot more respectful, and people will get to trust you better. So if you're constantly saying that you can do something, people will start to mistrust you, and your reputation will be tarnished, as you will be known as the developer who thinks they know it all. So admit when you don't know something. It's totally okay. Another thing I want to say is that you should be open to being wrong. So this is normally a tough one for most developers. Admitting that you're wrong about something is a very difficult thing to do. And it's okay to be wrong sometimes. I actually even encourage it. So take this situation, for example. We have Sarah and Sizwe in a team, and they end up on the topic of talking about how to implement networking in Android. So Sizwe says that the only way to do networking in Android is to use an HTTPS URL connection. So Sarah stands up and says, actually, Sizwe, there are many different ways in which we can do networking in Android. We could use retrofit or volley to do network requests. And Sizwe is like, I'm not happy with this. I'm the senior in the team, and the only way to do networking is the way that I've described. So what is wrong in this situation? Well, firstly, Sizwe is incorrect in his thinking, but let's not focus on that. His reaction to Sarah creates a really bad dynamic in the team. And just because he is senior in the team doesn't necessarily mean he knows everything there is to know. Sarah may have had different experiences that have shaped who and what she knows today. So what would a better response be in this kind of situation? So something along the lines of, oh, wow, that's interesting, Sarah. Do you mind showing me some examples of how you do that with those libraries? And then we can discuss it or see how to do it better. And this kind of reaction immediately creates a sense of respect in the team. So Sarah feels valued, and Sizwe doesn't feel like he is above anyone else. And they have a constructive discussion around this topic that they've now been talking about. Obviously, sometimes things don't go always to plan. And maybe you're having a bad day, or maybe you've just had a really horrible commute to work, or you caught the wrong train or something. And it's totally okay if you screw up. We're human, right? So just say sorry. It's okay. It's really okay to apologize if you've done something that you regret, and maybe you think to yourself, ooh, I was a bad human at this point. Let me go about saying sorry to this person. I really screwed up. Everyone is human after all. So this is something that I've been consciously doing for the past few months myself, and that is taking the time to reflect about what I've learned. And how can you move forward if you haven't seen where you've come from? So look back at your code from a couple of years ago. Are you writing better code? How far have you come since then? And if your code probably looks the same, you're probably not learning anything new or making yourself a better developer. So have you challenged yourself recently? I've found when I ask myself these questions, I often end up realizing that maybe I'm in the wrong job, or maybe I need a change of jobs or career. And at this point, I know I'm not progressing if I can't answer these questions. So when I'm not challenged, I'm not learning, and therefore I'm not bettering myself. So self-reflection is a very good habit to form. So let's talk a little bit about your team, or the next circle that we had a look at the start. So I've been very lucky to be involved in many different team dynamics. I've seen a lot of really bad teams, a lot of really good teams, and I've seen large apps fail because of bad teams, and apps succeed despite all the odds were against them because the team just got along so well. So there are many small things you can do in your team and habits that you can adopt in order to improve your team. So the first thing I want to do is I want to encourage you to encourage best practices within your team. So if you arrive in a new team and there is no process, there's no build server, there's no pull request process, be the one to go and implement that. Be the champion for that. Make it your mission to improve the process within the team. But at the same time, don't go in demanding things to be done a certain way. Be pragmatic and evaluate the situation at hand. Slowly go about implementing changes, and be sure before you do these changes to make sure that your whole company or team is on board before going about doing it. The last thing you want to be is the person pushing things that nobody else wants. So, I want to talk about being a Rick in a team. So, I say you shouldn't make yourself the sole person who can do something in your team, i.e. the Rick of the team. So, you should be sharing your domain knowledge with everyone. Take, for example, Rick. So, Rick is the lead of the Android team. And he was the one who wrote most of the code in the initial code base. So he was the only sole developer back in the day. And fast forward 3 years from now, the team is a lot bigger. But Rick decides he needs to take a 2-week holiday. The team in this 2 weeks is heard panicking and absolutely cannot function. And they're heard saying, oh my goodness, we can't release without Rick. Rick knows how to do it all. So Rick, without maybe realizing it, or maybe he did realize it, has made himself indispensable to the company. And no one can fire him, and he knows everything about the code, and no one else does. So there's a great article online about how being a Rick in a company can be a really bad thing. And my ideal is that when you leave a company, or if you change jobs, you shouldn't need to do a handover period. There should be no such thing as a handover period. You should be able to walk out tomorrow and just say, goodbye, everyone, see you later, see you at the next job, or something like that. But having a handover period means that there is knowledge in your team that you haven't shared with someone else. So I like to just make sure that we can avoid this kind of situation by making sure everyone in the team knows what everyone else is working on and how to do those kinds of things. So how could this be improved in your team? Well, there are a few different things that we can do. So the first way in which I like to do this in a different team is to have what I call a support role in a team. So this is somebody that goes about making all the releases for that sprint or 2-week cycle. This is also somebody that is responsible for answering any questions or bug reports that come in from external people. So this person should switch every 2 weeks in your sprint. So every 2 weeks it's somebody else's turn to be that person. And that ensures that everyone in the team has domain knowledge of all the different parts of that app or product that you're working on. Another thing that you can do in order to avoid this kind of key man knowledge or key woman knowledge is to do a short internal presentation before you submit a big feature or some kind of big piece of work that you're doing on. So you can do what we call pull requests to make sure your code and everyone reads through the code and understands it. But I also like to do a little presentation or just like demoing the code and running through the code that has been changed in order so that everyone feels comfortable with the new changes. So don't be a Rick. Share your knowledge with everyone in the team. So have you ever encountered a developer who's always on the defensive with their code? So this person is otherwise known as the "it's not my responsibility" developer. And this person is often found muttering things such as, that code wasn't written by me, I'm not fixing that bug, or that's not my code, that's that person's code. So sometimes you may hear a developer refuse to fix a bug or in code that they didn't initially write. And this person is incredibly frustrating to work with. And it's a fast-track way to get your whole team to resent you if you're this kind of person. So please don't be this person. If you're in a team of developers and the code belongs to the whole team, there is no my code, your code, whose code. It's everyone's code. So firstly, you should not take it personally if your code gets deleted. Maybe it's not relevant anymore. Maybe there's a better way. Your code will be gone at some point. It does not matter. And secondly, if there is somebody in your team, if there are a whole bunch of, say for instance, you implemented a feature and now a whole bunch of bugs have been reported on this feature. So you've got 10 bugs that you need to fix, and everyone else in your team is parking off because they don't have any bugs to fix in their stuff. Would you not want them to help you as well? So think about that. If I was in that situation, I would want everyone in my team to start helping me fix these bugs. It's not my bugs, your bugs, it's the whole team's bugs. Just fix them. Just fix the bugs. So another thing that I want to encourage is that you should ask for feedback. So if your company or product or team that you're working in doesn't have a formal feedback process, And I'm not talking about the once-a-year performance review feedback that you get, or every 6 months. I'm talking about very regularly, maybe even once every 2 weeks feedback process. If you don't have that kind of process in place, then just ask someone. It's simple. So you can just say to your colleague, hey, how do you think I'm doing with the code? Do you think there is anything I can improve on as a developer, or maybe not just with my code, maybe how I'm interacting? Do you feel like I'm doing my best, or what can I do to improve? So asking for this kind of feedback is very important, because you obviously think you know everything about yourself, and you think that you're doing your best job, but maybe someone else has a differing opinion. So just ask for the feedback and hear what other people have to say about how you can improve. So what is a better way to improve yourself than to ask others what you can do to become a better developer? One such way that I like to get feedback is through pull requests. So pull requests allow you to comment on each other's code and make suggestions or give compliments. That's also what pull requests are for. Did you know that? The problem with pull requests is that people often end up having a fight, or use it as a tool to put others down, or say, this code is not good, or have passive-aggressive arguments on pull requests. I've seen this before. So the thing that you should remember about pull requests is that there is a person behind that pull request who wrote that code and possibly spent a lot of time writing that code. So don't go, the first thing you do on the pull request is bash them down for what they've written. If there is something really, really bad with a pull request, go up to the person, or Skype call them, or hang out them, or something, and have a discussion around the code. It is a human being behind this code that you're now looking at. So I like to use a general rule of thumb of, if your comment that you're adding on a pull request is longer than 5 lines, stop what you're doing and go and talk to the person. Walk away from your computer and speak to them like a normal human being. Another great way to ensure that your comments aren't too negatively received, and to change the tone in which your message, is that you can ask a question instead of stating something. So maybe the person that has written the pull request has thought of something or encountered some bugs that you didn't even think of, or has been battling with this for 2 weeks and has now finally found a solution. So ask a question around the code. Ask inquisitive things. Say, is there a reason why this is done this way? Or why is this way? Or have you thought about doing something like this? And this will help change the tone, and it might even create a discussion around it. And this, for me, is just personal preference, but I find that adding emojis in my pull request comments really helps to convey the tone of my comments or what I'm leaving on a pull request. The next thing I want to talk about is how you can uplift and encourage your colleagues. So don't take credit for stuff that you didn't do. If you have a team where there's other developers that have also helped you build something, include them in your celebrations or congratulatory posts. And if there's a team member in your team that maybe doesn't speak up very often or is quite quiet, actively ask for their opinion and actually do something with it when you hear it. Don't just ignore what they've said. So if somebody in your team has improved their work, acknowledge it and encourage them to do better. So encourage your coworkers to pick up tasks that they may find is too much for them to handle. And if you can, then you can even help them complete those tasks as well. So be compassionate towards your peers. Ask them if they're battling. So maybe somebody's taken a little bit of time with their pull request, or is taking a little bit longer than you expected. Ask them if they need help and offer your help to them. So at Over, the company that I work for, we have this saying of go big and go home. And this basically means that we work hard when we're at work, but we also relax and remember that we have personal lives outside our work. So this was one hard lesson for me to learn. And last year I wasn't so good at managing my time. And it just gets, you really have to set those barriers up for yourself and make sure that you have your personal time for yourself. So just remember, if you do a lot of work in your own time, you're basically effectively doing more work than you're being paid for. So working 24/7 doesn't make you a hero. It actually is really, really bad for you and your mental health. Last year, I battled with this concept of going home, and it was my own fault. I accepted way too many speaking gigs, and yet here I am again. And I set myself some strange goals. So I had some strange achievement to unlock of writing a couple of blog posts. And this was totally unnecessary. I had no reason to be doing this or inflicting it on myself. So it was my own fault. And the pressure was all self-inflicted, and I didn't realize it. And at some point, I realized that I needed to be more intentional with my time and start saying yes and no to things that would only really benefit me and the community that I believe would be benefited from the best. So now I suddenly find myself having time to do such strange things like reading a novel or practicing Pilates if I want to, or baking when I have my free time. And I want to encourage you, if you're a team lead in your team or you're a manager of some sorts, set the example for your team. Because I can guarantee you when you leave the office at 7 p.m., at 7:30, the developers are following you straight after that. They wait until you go home first. So be that person that goes home first. Your health and personal life needs to come first. So let's take a look at how you can contribute to your company. So looking at the company that you work for, there are so many things you can do as a developer in order to make an impact. So let's take a look at a few examples. So let's talk a little bit about knowledge sharing. So there are so many different ways within your company that you can share knowledge between one another. And my favorite is to use Slack. So we use Slack to share information with different channels and maybe articles and things that we found useful. But we also have this concept at Over of a lunch and learn. And this is basically where everyone, or maybe once a week, we have somebody who preps a little bit and does a short presentation on something that they've learned recently. And we all get together and have something to eat, and then watch this presentation. So these presentations don't have to be massively prepared or very formal or anything. It's basically just a conversation starter. And now, at this point, after the presentation or during the presentation, there's a lot of questions and a lot of sort of discussions between the developers. And this is very important for the team in order to make sure we're learning new things as well as sharing knowledge between each other. It's even better if these sessions are recorded. So if new developers join your team, they can have context and look back and watch all these different lunch and learn sessions that you've had in your company, and they can then get a feel for exactly what the developers prefer in certain areas. So I want to encourage you to take pride in your work. So if you have an app that is crashing and you've got it on the store and you're just ignoring it, what are you doing? Get out there and fix that failing build or that failing app. There is nothing worse than writing a really bad or downloading an app and it doesn't work. So I find a lot of developers don't seem to care about their work, which is, I actually find this quite sad to see. Why would you want to make something that's not good? Why wouldn't you want to improve your work? Doesn't make sense to me. There are so many ways that you can keep track of the things that you've built and the way in which your apps are performing in the wild. And the simplest, of course, is to add a crash reporting tool. This is the simple one. But the catch is, when you add a crash reporting tool, you actually have to use it and fix the crashes that it reports. So there's no use just having the tool logging information and you don't fix anything. So if you have a crash reporting tool, which you should, go about looking and fixing and prioritizing these issues. And some companies that I've seen don't care much for Google Play Store reviews. And if this is the case with a company that you work at or App Store reviews, what is stopping you from you being your team and taking responsibility and ownership of that and responding to people on the App Store reviews and trying to help them fix those issues? So I like to think of this as part of the support role, and this is a really great way to get feedback around what exactly is going wrong in your app. This is feedback you are getting for free from users. It is a great place to get feedback from. So there are many ways that you can make your work better. So implement some tools and monitor the performance of your app and take action to fix those that are picked up by these tools. Another way that I can tell if a developer has been professional or not is the way in which they can conduct themselves with regards to work. So I've worked with many developers who haven't quite thought of their approach in maybe their email communications or their interactions with their peers. So I knew someone who would write the world's most cringiest emails. If you have an email that has come through, and this is maybe an email about a serious production incident, maybe something is going heavily wrong in production, and nobody can use your app, it is not appropriate to respond with the words ha ha or lol in your response to them. This is just generally something you shouldn't do. But also, I'm not one for advocating for professional attire all the times or having this professional way of speaking in all your emails or all your interactions. After all, I'm the one that adds all the dancing emojis on Slack. That's me, I'm that person. But you got to know and come to what is best for the audience that you're targeting, or the message or the context of something you've received. So sure, you can have playful conversations with your team and put dancing emojis in your messages to each other. But at some point, if it is something super serious, you should treat it in that way and respond with actual professionalism in your responses. So somebody that I worked with recently was from a different background to the rest of the team that I was in. So South Africans, if nobody knows a South African, we're generally the type that'll sugarcoat anything. So if we get an email, or if we're sending an email, we will structure it and say, how is your family? Or, I hope everything is going well. What did you eat for lunch? Before we actually get to the point of the email. So we will then say, oh yeah, by the way, production's down. And maybe we should do something about it. So it's important to be aware of different cultural backgrounds as well in the teams that you're working with. So for us, we had a developer who was not a South African. And this person was very direct in their messaging. And that's maybe fine in different cultures. But a lot of people, the feedback for this person was that they were too direct in what they were saying and very harsh. And people didn't like the way the emails were coming across. So what this person ended up doing was saying, before he wrote an email, he would say, hey, somebody, please can you just proofread what I've written and help me maybe sugarcoat this a little bit, maybe make this a little bit less harsh. And that helped a lot in what people thought about his interactions with the rest of the team. As well as for company conflicts, if you get an email and you're very, very angry about this email, getting angry in a response to an email is never a real good idea. So what I like to do if I get an email or message that I'm not really happy with, what I do is I call a tea timeout. So that's basically just me going and getting a cup of tea and sitting away from my computer for 10, 15 minutes and drinking this cup of tea and then coming back to my desk. And at that point, I've probably calmed down quite a lot, and now I'm ready to respond to this email in a better way. So you need to think about your interactions with people and be professional in how you come across to them. So now this is more of a practical thing and something that we do at Over, and that is that we have what we call a gratitude Slack channel. And this is basically a place where everyone is encouraged to write things that they're grateful for. And it's something that can be as simple as a cup of coffee that you shared with a colleague, or something that maybe somebody's helped you with something really difficult and it wasn't really part of what they were supposed to do. And since seeing this kind of thing in action, I'm actually so impressed at how much it can change the feeling in the company. So people are openly thanked and thanking one another, and they're appreciated for their hard work and collaboration. So I guess this kind of gratitude can be implemented in many different forms. But basically, you should have a way to thank the people that you're working with, and every now and again, maybe say thank you to them. It's great for team morale and spirit. So a lot of what I've said previously applies to the larger community as well. So let's talk a little bit about the things you can do when you get to the stage of thinking about further than the company that you work for and possibly the bigger community that you want to contribute to. So the first and probably most important, I think, is that if you've battled through some kind of documentation on something, you should write about it somewhere, anywhere. This could be in the form of your own question and answer on Stack Overflow. That's totally acceptable. I've done it. I know, I was like, somebody's going to need this. I'm going to write this down. And it could also be in the form of documentation for some kind of library, or it could be in the form of a blog post or some sample code. That's also okay. It'll definitely help someone out eventually. And I touched on this a bit when we spoke about the things you can do to improve yourself. And the great thing about writing is that it's not just for the benefit of you, but for the great community otherwise. So when I've suggested to someone that you should write about something, often I've heard the response of, but there's already a blog post on that topic, or there's already a couple of sample apps. And yes, while that might be true, there might be a few of those examples online. You don't just read, for me, when I'm learning a new topic, I don't just read one article or blog post about the subject. I scan a few articles, I'd read a few blog posts, just to see the overlap and see how different people have implemented something. So writing from your experience is totally valid, and don't worry if someone else has written something similar before. That's totally fine. So last year, a few developers that I know decided to reboot the Google Developer Group Johannesburg. And this has been such a rewarding experience for us. And yes, it's a lot of hard work to organize something like this, and it can take up time, but let me tell you that organizing a community event is so rewarding. And it's so nice to have somebody come up to you and say, thank you so much for that event, I really learned a lot. Or even better, somebody who's totally switched careers because of your meetup. Now, isn't that something really cool? So if you're a meetup organizer, thank you. And if you're a meetup attendee, maybe take some time to thank your organizers or offer your assistance in some way that you can to help better the community. So if you haven't found a local meetup or group that you want to be a part of, what's stopping you from starting your own community? Building a community is a rewarding way to give back. So let's talk a little bit about the power of open source. I'm 100% sure that every developer in this room has benefited from open source in some way. And this brings me to what you can do to contribute to open source. So take a look at your code base that you've got, maybe in your job, or maybe something that you worked on as a student in university. Sorry. And if there is something that maybe someone else might benefit from, what's stopping you from making that open source? And the best part about open source is that you have other people looking at your code and possibly finding bugs or something in your code, and maybe even contributing and fixing it. And another thing to consider is not just to open source your own work, is to contribute to other open source work. So if you're using a library, a popular one, and you find a bug, don't just copy the source code into your own app and fix the bug. Make a pull request and fix the bug on the actual repository. Everyone will thank you for that as well. And you're improving it and giving back to the community. So the last thing I want to touch on is that starting out fresh from university, for me, it was a very difficult or different adjustment to make in the real working world. So in university, you're doing well if you're getting a certain mark, right? It's pretty clear. You get an A, you get a B, you get a C, 80%, 70%, whatever. And this can often lead to people competing against one another, and I'm trying to get better marks than you, or you're trying to do better than me. And I think this is a bit of a natural progression, I guess, when you assign values to things. But when you come into the working world, there is no such thing as an A, a B, or a C, or anything like that. And it may be easy to carry on with your competitive streak and try to be better than others or get ahead of everyone. But you'll soon realize that after university or college, it becomes more about collaboration and uplifting the others around you, rather than trying to better yourself. I mean, what's the point of being the best at your job if everyone else around you isn't as good? Try and make everyone get on the same level as you. It's not a competition, it's a collaborative effort. We're all in this together, and we can only improve by sharing our experiences with each other and helping others grow when we grow. So by now, you're probably thinking that that was a lot to take in for 40 minutes. And yes, I agree. There is so much you can do outside of your current role or job to improve yourself or your reach as a developer. So I believe word of mouth is the most powerful mechanisms. And there's no greater power in having a very good referral for a review or a new job. So if someone has to say to you, hey, have you worked with Rebecca before? You almost always want the answer to be, hell yeah, she's awesome, you should totally hire her. So a lot of these tips and habits are all about being mindful about the others around you. So today I encourage you to look at how others perceive you and your interactions around them. Do you come across in a harsh way? And what can you do to improve yourself? But I also want everyone to take the time to reflect on how far you've already come and what you can have already learned and changed. Are you a better developer today than what you were yesterday? Thank you.